Okay, I hope you guys had a good morning tea. Okay, without further ado, I will kind of read through the introduction or the instruction for the session. Um, Please just bear with me because I will improvise in timing, so you have to stick on time. Okay, thank you. We have about almost 2 hours 30 minutes for the first session, and I hope everyone should participate fairly. So I have to give enough time for everyone. Okay. Firstly, I need to introduce the topic and the panel members. So according to the program, we have the first session, we have ICTs and online privacy in small developing island states. Firstly, I have to introduce the panelists. Okay. Once I have introduced you guys, please, you need to help me to welcome on stage those panelists because we have a mix of distinguished panelists, so they're experts on their own areas. Okay, firstly, we have Dalsi Panela. Just for your information, she is the first female regulator for this country. She's the first, the entire country. So she's the fourth regulator of the TRR. And she's one of our panelists this morning. Thank you. Take your seat. The second is Mr. Alvin Prasad, which is the senior engineer of the ICT, Ministry of Communication of Vichy. And he is also an expert in that field. So we welcome you this morning on the platform. Thank you, Alvin. The next panelist is Mr. Mark. Sorry, I kind of had the opposition here. I just said. He's one of the main guy who looks after the regulatory in the region. So you guys have to ask more questions to him because he's expert in his own field. And finally, we have Noel from ISOC. Okay, thank you. Without further ado, I will allow 10 to 15 minutes for each panelist. Please just be fair with the other panelists. You have only 10 to 15 minutes to present. And after the presentations for all of those panelists, I will open up with a few questions just to ask them to stimulate the questions. And after that, I will allow the floor to be open for the audience to ask questions to the panelists. Thank you. So I have to read an introductory of this session. So bear with me while I'm reading through this note I'm preparing here. So the internet and particularly its role is combating censorship and encourage public awareness and engagement. It is very such a working in progress in Vanuatu for the context of Vanuatu. While for the other countries, the challenge is how best to leverage the internet as a tool for social justice, education, public health, employment, and more other benefits. The primary challenge for Vanuatu and the Pacific is simply to ensure access to information technology of any kind. That says internet and related technologies has already begun to make their influence felt in a number of meaningful ways. To our understanding, awareness has been yet and its fully capacity may be due to facilities, expertise, and financial capacities to roll out the said task. Having said that, there are a handful of issues in regards to the ICT and online privacy, such as personal information, usage, hiking, transferring of data or information from one account to the other, and many more others. I believe the same scenario occurs in other Pacific countries. This is why we are here today to hear from the local and regional policymakers, regulators, industry, civil societies, and technical stakeholders to discuss the privacy implications of ICT on small island developing states. And the case study is Vanuatu. Hence, the outcome will be helpful to tackle the good approaches or mechanisms industries and private sectors approach emerging in norms, and then to adopt to ensure that the usage or the privacy and personal data are protected in this country. Let's hear from our panelists. Firstly, we will start off with a seating arrangement. We have the regulator, Alvin, Mark, and Noel will be the final panelist to present. Thank you, regulator.
Okay, thank you, moderator. As you have heard from the introduction, is about privacy, online privacy. Whatever the devices that you're using and whatever the information that you're uploading and whatever information that you have considered to be your personal private information, this time round is the time for us to discuss. Right, back to the regulatory framework for Vanuatu. So the liberalization, well, I don't know whether if you understand or if you've heard before, has started back in 2008. So it's almost 9 years or 10 years next year in April that we have now in the competition market. So both voice and as well as internet, okay, especially for Vanuatu's case, it's, main cities, main urban areas, Luganville and Port Vila, as well as Isangel and Lakatoro. So what is it available for the citizens? For you as a user, for you and I, having to put our personal details, through the Facebook, through WhatsApp, through other applications, whatever it's up online. But what you have posted, to share with your friends or a group of friends is, something, is an information that you consider to be your own personal details, or you consider to be group information. So for Vanuatu's case, what's available in terms of framework mechanism? What is it there that when you have an issue, then you come over to the TRR or to the policymakers, which is the government, that you can ask for assistance to cater for the issue that you have encountered? What is it? So as we speak today, let me tell you that we have nothing in place, okay? This is particularly if you're referring to the online information that you have considered to be a private information. So that's already one issue for you to be aware of, okay? This across, and just imagine that by end of this year, if we are having, that extension of coverage, okay, internet coverage, how much more, including yourself, the population is going to be, in the same booth, okay? You're having issues. There is no mechanism that if you come and bring your complaints to TRR, how can we assist you in that? Zero, okay? We are fortunate to have a cyber security policy. What does the policy do? The policy sets out or outlined the approaches that we as an organization, policymakers, regulators, internet communities, and so forth, could look at, and as a guide to lead them to come up with an appropriate approach or mechanism that will assist you and I. So that for Vanuatu's case, we do have the policy. Cyber security policy. Go there and find out where you can play, where is your responsibility that comes in. Okay, what's there as a user? Let's focus at the user perspective. So for you as a user, you have a role to play. And as part of the regulator's function, which is in consumer protection, let me let you know today that for Vanuatu's case, the protection that is catered for in the Vanuatu legislation is framed along the mobile, okay? It's voice, and it's not data or online privacy. It's not framed along data. So it's voice, which means that we still have an issue to look at. Okay, so what can be done? Because there is no legislation, let's say, or a framework that will assist us users, and because there is a policy in place, but we need some implementers, what can be done for a start, given that the TRR is also leading, protection, consumer protection in this society? So what had happened so far is that thanks to my team who are around, and you can see George is the consumer officer who's assisted with other officers in TRR. So we set up what we call community consumer champions. Why do we have that initiative? Why is that initiative established? It's because they can be an arm's length for the regulator at the community level, given that we have very limited resource. So what do we do with them? We provide them basic training, okay, to understand, what type of information on online privacy, whatever. So And these champions, they go from community to educate the users at that level. So that's one initiative that was established, to combat the challenge. Okay, and also we have come up with what we call Consumer Awareness Protection Plan, and that protection plan has assisted us to, do our awareness. So my team has been around Vanuatu and do a lot of awareness to the communities, particularly in areas where they've already have access to internet and are enjoying internet. So that the awareness is there. But the challenge is, one, you as a user, you also need to be responsible to play your part. And what is it? When posting whatever information, when uploading whatever information, be aware that the information can be a public information, or it can be a permanent information, or it can be a temporary. It depends very much on whatever means that you are using. So, but again, let's go back to the specific matter. For example, for us, what has been brought to the TRR's awareness and attention? First is the specific information that is considered to be a private information. An example, your phone numbers. If you call up Digicel or TVL in Vanuatu, none of the operators will provide you with your friend's number. Why? Because that is considered to be a private information. Okay? And they will never give you an information or personal detail unless you give consent to someone to do so. Unless you have consulted TVL, consulted Digicel, that you've allowed them to give that personal detail information to someone who is seeking to get that information. So that's existed today for Vanuatu, okay? But what about the information that you're supplying to your friends? That's on your hands. Whatever it's leaked out, it's out of the private, the operator's hands, okay? What about your bank details? Remember, when you are enrolling for studies at university, when you are subscribing or opening a bank account, or when you are, attending whatever workshops, they will always ask you some personal information. Then ask yourself whether this information will be protected and will not be supplied. You came in this morning and you saw you've signed off to collect your lanyard, okay? And you've also know that the TRR have got all your email addresses for those of you that sign up. Ask yourself whether this information is kept as a private information, okay? None of the registrars actually came up and said, okay, tell us, are you going to keep our information, confidential? But because it's one of the TR's role and function to maintain all the personal details confidential, you were lucky, okay? But ask yourself with whoever organization that you have registered for. For the banks, there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages of whatever questions, and at the same time, you have to fill in your personal information, your number, your email address, and having your account. Ask yourself whether they are protected. So these are the key issues that we should be on top of them and be aware of as a user. Okay, so I have explained to you all, listeners, that for Vanuatu's case, and I believe it's across the Pacific, which Alvin will also talk about briefly on Fiji's case, on what's available, what mechanism is available for you as a user, to protect you from all the hackings and whatever activities going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Regulator. The next panelist is Alvin Prasad, Senior Engineering Officer or ICT at the Ministry of Communication of Fiji. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll basically continue from what Delcy had mentioned and probably break down into finer details about some of the issues that she has raised for the Pacific. One thing I think she mentioned was the consumer protection and how users go about handling data online. And I think the simple solution to that is to have a security culture built into our education system, which will basically look into more awareness programs on how to be safe and go about handling data, which is critical online, and then especially for school students. I think like Delcy mentioned in Fiji at the IPT Policy and Regulatory Forum, that we had a sudden influx in mobile broadband in the Pacific recently, coming with 3G and 4G services more readily available now. And one thing we notice is that now we have children who are accessing social media, and one thing easily is they having access to handheld devices, and we don't have much of our regulation at home from parents and those sort of things. And so whatever happens at home is something which is quite difficult to manage at a national perspective. I think it is a challenge for regulators and policymakers to handle all those issues. And I think the bottom line is we need to have awareness at all the levels, quite a big deal of that. And I think we talked about child online protection and so on. So for Fiji's case, I'm going to be really honest, we don't have really serious awareness programs happening. We, however, did some work on the national cybersecurity strategy, which looks into more issues such as CERT implementation, standards, and those sort of things. But the biggest thing lacking is the awareness bit. And when it comes to consumer protection, I think in March we hosted the World Consumer Rights Day, and I think the major focus, a major theme for this year was mobile protecting digital data for users. And I think in Fiji's case, the Consumer Council of Fiji did a lot of work in that aspect, working with the regulators and the ministry, having one whole day session on data protection regulation and those sort of things. The issue is really a global issue, content policy, and we've recently seen a lot of threats and global attacks. I think if you recently followed last week, we had a ransomware attack which affected more than 150 countries. That coming back is, it all comes back to the lack of cybersecurity understanding and investments by organizations. I recently read one of these reports released last year by a global internet security company, which says almost 82% of the countries don't believe that there is enough being done in the areas of cybersecurity, education, and talent building, and which that goes on to say that we have probably 76% of governments which do not invest much in the national cybersecurity awareness and technical education of personnels in the country. And I think that's one challenge we have in the Pacific. We have very few cyber experts. And for Fiji's case, we've done quite a bit of surveys, and then we found out that even in the bigger corporate organizations, we hardly have people who look into cybersecurity and just let alone data security. Like Delcy mentioned, we have data which is very critical, and then for I think Vanuatu's case, we had some organizations which really are serious about that. But in most organizations at the ISP level, banks, data processors, I think the mindset is that simply that it is not a big serious problem for them. But if you look globally, it's just the other way around. It's just I think we in the Pacific are failing to understand all the challenges and the problems which will be faced in future if we lag behind on those aspects. Coming back to the policy level, I think Vanuatu mentioned they did some work on the policy a few years back. And one other issue there is that we generally work on a cybersecurity or cybercrime policy or regulation, let's say, for example. But we are actually not looking at the broader aspects of data protection and regulations. And what we are lacking behind is the data security standards and compliance. I think when we look at the Australian cybersecurity strategy and how strict their standards are, I think they released their first yearly report last week after their review of the strategy. So that I think in the Pacific we have Australia is the leading hand in cybersecurity, and I think we in the other smaller nations we will need to basically look at Australia as a benchmark and come up with our own solutions and policies to match up with our own problems. Recently, we had an issue in Germany where they are trying to work on a new legislation and a law which would combat hate speech online, and we've seen quite a bit of that happening in the Pacific as well. Recently in Fiji, we've had a few cases. So the new proposed legislation for Germany would actually have the provisions to impose fines of up to 50 million euros for social media companies if they are non-compliant with content blocking and content removal from, let's say, for example, Facebook. So certain things, I think, like Delcy mentioned earlier in one of the sessions in Nandi, that for the most of the Pacific countries, the internet was just sort of looked at as a let's say, for example, Facebook or social media usage and YouTube and those kind of things. But there's a lot more which is there. I think Noel mentioned in the morning about the internet, and I think she will further talk about the internet and other services. Yeah, I think we will also need to look at such frameworks for legislations and incorporate that when we work for the regulations for the Pacific. And another upcoming thing is the Facebook Live feature, which is having a big problem recently. And I'm sure if you must have been aware that last month in the US there was a video posted of a live shooting and which had a big problem from Facebook's end. So Facebook is currently working on its video censoring procedures. I think some of the algorithms they're trying to change that when it comes to video reviewing, and because they seem to have the view that their tools are being used to promote violence and they basically want to crack down on that. I think recently they have hired a lot of staff to just look at reviewing videos online. And one thing they have mentioned in a Facebook statement is that they really don't want to suppress on users' rights to access information. So that's one of the reasons why their censoring procedures had been not really effective, sort of to speak. But the problem with the live feature and any video for that matter on Facebook is that once it is out there, if it does not get reported in, the video or any content would still remain on their platform. So if there's any report, it's not just one, but this probably depending on the algorithm, how they actually track reporting and the actions they take after they get the reporting. So I think in that case of the US shooting, the video had been there for a few hours, and then no one had actually reported on that video, and everything was posted and the shootings happened, and then I think later that Facebook found out, and then they were by the time they took off the Facebook, a lot of shared had been done, a lot of website had access to the videos, and I think a lot of people were insulted by that, and actually a lot of blame was put on Facebook for not putting down the content on time. So yeah, that is one big thing happening now, and I think the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, is sort of proposing to regulate social networks and video online, similar to what they do for television. So I probably speak a bit on another European model, which is looking on a regulation which will look at protecting EU data. So they call this the General Data Protection Regulation for the Europe, which will give citizens a lot of power of how their data is used and used by the commercial processes online. So the GDPR will actually come into effect from next year, May, and which was adopted last year. So they've got I think 2 years for compliance, and this would generally affect a lot of countries globally. So there's a lot of strict requirements to be compliant, and I think Europe, EU countries mainly have been given a few, probably 2 years to work on in compliance come May next year. How this would affect the other countries, I think this is something which we will need to update ourselves with, and because this would not generally only focus on European countries, but how outside of EU jurisdiction the data is held outside. So I'm sure there's a few other companies globally who hold and process EU citizens' data. So that all others outside EU would be really concerned if this thing comes into effect next year, and I'm sure they have been outlined of all the effects and the procedures to reach the requirement and compliant for the GDPR from next year. And one thing we notice is the issue of Internet of Things issues. So I think we have discussed quite a number of devices in the market which have been affected, smart TVs and so forth. I think as we go along with the ICT evolution, 4G and 5Gs will have a lot of IoT applications and services in the market come 2020. So 5G is all about IoTs. With that, we'll have a lot of cyber issues, I think, and we all should be ready for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay, for the brilliant presentations. And the next panelist is Mr. Mark. He's He's one of the members of the regional regulatory, and he's has a lot to say based on his experience. Thanks.
Okay, as I said when I gave the welcoming remarks, this shouldn't always be a one-way conversation. So I'm going to ask you to at least participate at the outset here, because we need to get some sense of quite frankly, who we're speaking to and who we're going to be hearing from. So a show of hands, who doesn't use Digicel in the room? Does not use Digicel in the room. Okay. Let's see. Who uses Google as their homepage? One. Google. Who uses Google as your homepage? Okay, so you start with search. Okay. Who uses Facebook as a homepage? Okay, come on, come on. If you do, just put it up. Okay, the camera's pointing this way. They can't see you. Okay. Who keeps their Wi-Fi on all the time? Never shuts it down, so every hotspot you can use. Okay, good. The reason I ask those questions is because each of those questions bears upon, although you may not realize it, how you feel about your own privacy right now. Let's start at the top of the scale in terms of this region. When TVL becomes part of ATH, the Vodafone group as we know it in Fiji, you will have in your country Digicel is global in terms of its activities both in the Pacific, in the Central America, and in the Caribbean, and Vodafone certainly is a regional powerhouse here in its incarnation under ATH. It additionally has a bid out for Blue Sky, which will bring in three or four more countries. So you are dealing with players who have not just domestic, not just local activities where your information is going to be sold, handled, stored, but regional, certainly in the case of ATH, and global in the case of Digicel. Now, another question. How many of you use WhatsApp instead of SMS? Come on, it's got to be more than that. There we go. Okay, and how many of you are not using your carrier for voice? You're using something like a Skype or a TalkTalk or something like that. Okay, so as I spoke before, and what I want to do with this brief presentation is outline how your privacy is at risk. Because frequently, people don't know what's going on with their information and how their information plays in the internet economy. Digicel and TVL and certainly Vodafone utilize your subscription fees, which are really your usage fees, because I'm going to assume most of you are on prepaid. So if you don't use their network, they don't get the money. You give them the money, and you get your prepaid account, but until you use it, they don't get to what's called book that money. They don't get to count it as revenue until it's used up. So if you bought a gig for 30 days, they don't get to claim the money until the 30 days are up or until you've used the gig inside the month. Now, what they've typically sold you, and these are both carriers, and this is not just unique to Vanuatu. This is worldwide. This is just the way it's done. Is they've sold you a package that has data, which you're using a lot of. It has some voice in it, and it has some SMS in it. The SMS portion of that package and the voice portion of that package are where they make the most of their money. So in terms of what it takes to provide you a voice call or what it takes to provide you the capacity to do SMS versus what it takes for you to send a data message, they make more money on voice when you buy voice minutes. They make more money on SMSs when you send an SMS message. When you take that traffic that's associated with that and make it all into data, make it all into the data portion of your plan, they make less money on you. because you're moving from a high margin product. The profit they make is called margin. You're moving from a high profit product to one that's much thinner. The amount of money they make on each megabit, on each kilobit that you buy is far less than what they would make on a voice call and on an SMS. And even if you take it in the aggregate, the amount of data that is used for a 2-minute call or a 30-minute call brings into them far less revenue and far less profit than that caller, that SMS would have given them if you had used their service, the voice minute or the SMS. So as you move your usage from voice calling and SMS messaging into data, they are making less money. Their business models, their build-outs, the towers, the offices, the number of employees that are there to take care of you, the number of employees that are there to fix the towers and fix the transmitters, are all based upon a business model that assumed that there would, for some period of time, be those profits from voice and those profits from SMS, in addition to the narrow profits that they make on data. So as you shift your traffic, and it's certainly it's certainly not just your right, but a reasonable move to shift your traffic over to data because it costs you less, their business models begin to explode. So they are making less money. How can they begin to fill that gap in their revenue stream and in their profitability so that the network stays running? That's really the question. That's what's important to you. It's important to them. It's important to TRR. How do they keep the network up and running, which means how do they pay the employees? How do they keep on investing in the network? How do they manage to have enough money to keep that network going? What they've got in addition to your data traffic is they've got information about your calling, about your data usage. Let's understand. Who thinks they know what the carrier's got on them? Nope. Nobody? Okay. What the carrier's got is where is the IP address and of where you're sending your data traffic. So if you're going to WhatsApp, they know you're going to WhatsApp. You're going to Facebook, they know you're going to Facebook. You're going to Google, they know you're going to Google. They can watch that. They need to do that in order to properly build out and engineer their networks and monitor the network traffic to see whether or not their network off a given tower is being congested and whether anything after that tower is clogging up what's called the middle mile, the area, the transmission that goes from the cell tower to their point that goes to the internet. So they get to monitor their traffic. So what you send over the network is what they can see. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to when you are using an app. Many apps, and primarily the one that is talked about the most, WhatsApp, winds up sending all of its communications encrypted. So while the telephone company may know that you are sending information over WhatsApp, they don't know what the information is. That's scrambled. So there are other apps that are unencrypted. So one of the things you may want to think about in terms of your privacy is, are you using an encrypted app or are you using an open app? Because that becomes an issue of who can see what you're saying and who can see what you're sending. And that applies not just to conversations and words, but to digits, such as your bank account and your passwords. So that's a starting point in terms of understanding who can see what you're sending. Because the next takedown is for those of you who keep that Wi-Fi on all the time, as well as for those of you who are using your mobile phone and keeping that on all the time, is that your location can be seen as you move from the telephone company's perspective from tower to tower, and from the Wi-Fi perspective from those Wi-Fi hotspots. So that information gets aggregated as you hit the network. Your device goes to the Wi-Fi network, from the Wi-Fi network up to whichever telephone company is connecting that Wi-Fi network to the internet. So now what's being open, if you will, or what's available, is where you're going on the internet and where you are physically, and where you go to. What's your path, really, as you hit from tower to tower or hotspot to hotspot. So that information is known just by turning on your phone. It may be, that stuff's not encrypted, okay, because the telephone company needs it, and it's the basic information on which your communications are being sent. So that kind of information, that's a one level of where your concern ought to be. Now, how many of you have bank accounts? I'm curious. Okay. Here's something else for you to be concerned about. Not that the world is entirely scary, but it's not just your information and your hold on that information that winds up being critical. You go into a store, you go into a Bon Marché, and you pull out your debit card for your day's worth or your week's worth of grocery shopping. And they swipe it on the wireless device that's next to the register to take the debit card. If that wireless communication to their back room isn't encrypted, that's an open conversation with your PIN and your bank account number. So it's not just what you do with your information, it's what the people you are transacting with do with your information and how protected that link is. So you're having a conversation, essentially a data conversation with Bon Marché. You go to pay in the eCash way that the government probably is actually encouraging as they move towards e-commerce. But if the communication between the register and the back room that's sending the information to the bank where your account is being debited isn't encrypted, that's open. And if there's somebody who is savvy enough to get into that, to tap into that conversation, or in the case of a couple of shops, chains in the United States a few years ago, stored the information in an unencrypted form before sending it to the bank on a daily basis, your banking information is open. So the issue of privacy is not just what you are doing with the information, but what is the next person in the chain of control of the information doing with the information? And that gets back to the Google and Facebook discussion that I started out with, which is the TRR, or globally, they can outlaw Google and Facebook selling your information. We've done that more or less in the United States in terms of making it very difficult for those next row of players in the data market to sell your information. But what they can do is they can bring up a business that has people come to them and say, you are sitting on this bank of information, this huge trove of information about where people go on the internet, who they transact with, maybe how much they transact, to some extent what they're saying. We would like you to figure out for us where to advertise and how to couch the message we give to them. So there's never got to be a sale. Your information never has to leave Facebook. Your information never has to leave Google. Google creates the profile of you. Facebook creates the profile of you. And people will buy access in order to get to that, in order to have that profile be a marketing tool for them, which is how the ads you see on Facebook and the ads you see on Google get presented to you. The information never really leaves those two ecosystems. They create a profile for you. Somebody says, I want to advertise to anyone who is 21 to 25 and who you think has bought diapers in the last 2 years, because I'm going to advertise kids' clothing. That ad gets shown to you. It never leaves Google. The advertiser never knows about it. Google and Facebook know that they've shown you that ad based upon your login. Because after the phone companies, and after your homepage, the next person who knows the most about you are anybody who you're using with an ID. So as you log into your Google account, as you log into your to iTunes, as you log into Facebook, Facebook's tracking you, Google's tracking you, Apple's tracking you. And so they will track you while your telephone company tracks you as you use their network. If you're sitting on a Wi-Fi network, your telephone company may have lost contact with you. But if you're using Google, a signed-in account to Google or a signed-in account to Facebook as your homepage, they've still got you. They know where you are, and they know how you're using your internet because you're on their platform. So these are the kinds of privacy issues that young people need to know as they use the internet. It's how it works, who's getting the information, what's in my transmission stream, and what are they doing with it, and how are they protecting me? That winds up being the issue. Now, the challenge for those of you who are even thinking about a career in law is that the law is respected only to the extent that legal violations, A, can be detected, and B, can be enforced. So TRR can pass a regulation, or your legislature can pass a law that says nobody can sell your information, nobody could even store your information. However, if TRR and your police cannot enforce that, doesn't matter what the law says, it will happen. One thing we've learned in the United States, and we've learned in the EU, and in the developing world, and certainly in the islands, is that the law will always be lagging behind technology. So it is really up to you, the technology users, to understand what is happening with the things you hold dear. Your personal information, your cash, your health, your personal beliefs. You need to know what's happening to that information because the law is not just simply is not in a position to protect you right away. It may catch up, but it will always be behind the curve. We talked briefly about cybersecurity. There was the hack this weekend, which was the ransomware hack that hit about 150 countries. There was the DDoS attack a little earlier in the year that globally took down Facebook, Google, Netflix, and Twitter by hitting up the level of the domain at the domain name server level. And there are others. It winds up being critical for your personal information. It's critical to the internet from a perspective of your personal information that you protect yourself because there are areas where the government simply can't protect you. The reason the virus, the ransomware worked this weekend is because people had not run a Microsoft patch that was available since March. The reason the DDoS attack took place was because people had routers that they had not changed the admin password on and just left it open for somebody to actually scour the internet, find all the Wi-Fi hotspots that left their password as admin and their username as admin, and change them all so that all of them redirected an attack on the DNS server in the United States. It's all up to you at the very core as an internet user. Government can't catch up to technology, and it cannot possibly protect you as well as you can protect yourself. So the onus is on what we would say in the southern part of the United States, y'all. It's not on Dulce, it's not on the regional regulators, it's not on the cops, it's on y'all. And that's the point I'll leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So if you want to know more about this online privacy, you can grab over a movie entitled Snowden. That's a good movie to watch. Snowden. Write down this title, Snowden, a movie called Snowden. Then you will understand what Mark is trying to say. Thank you very much, Mark. And the final presenter is Noel from ISOC, and she will present to us more on the global perspective or arena. She's much professional on that area. So the mic is yours, Nola.
Thank you very much. So far, very, very interesting insights from our panelists. I just for curiosity, m- uh, Mark brought up a few very well, a lot of interesting things, but a few points that I was hoping to pick up on. Who here doesn't log out of Facebook when they log into Facebook through their browser? Who doesn't log out? I do the same. I'm very bad. Or Google as well. I use Gmail, so when I open Gmail, I just I don't want to be logging in all the time. So, I know. I shouldn't be saying this. Oh my goodness. I'm on camera as well. But yeah, but it's something that I really should do. But so what is happening now is that Facebook and Google and I suppose other sites as well, as long as you're not logged out, even if you've left, even if you have a tab, you have a Facebook tab, you've closed it, you're no longer on Facebook, but you're not logged out, they still monitor everything that you do on your browser. You're not on Facebook anymore. Say you're browsing through Amazon, you're browsing through I don't know what else are kids browsing through these days. But any of the other sites that you use, any of the sites that you visit, if you notice, once you log back into Facebook, in your newsfeed there will be some like okay, there was one time I wanted to search for I had a work trip to Japan, so I was searching for flights in Japan Airlines, and I wasn't on Facebook at all. I was on the Japan Airlines website, and then I was also going on Google Flights and looking for flights. And then the next day when I log into Facebook, on my newsfeed, not on the side, but on the newsfeed itself, the suggested posts, a lot of deals about Japan. Vacation deals and a lot of suggested, fly on this date and you will get this much off. So, so it's getting to a point wherein we also have to ask, are they crossing some boundaries? Because you're no longer using the service, but they're still trying to keep track of you. So anyway, just a side note. So what I was hoping to talk about, how many in this room have a technical background or are studying a technical course? No one? Okay, so how many have heard of what we call the IoT or the Internet of Things? Quite a few people. So the IoT is I don't know, you might have seen it on TV or some ads, when you have things that are not considered a computer or a computing device. So this is a computing device. This is a computing device. Your tablet is a computing device. But say if you have a microphone, would you consider this a computer? No. Do you have a refrigerator? Is that a computer? Not in the conventional sense. You have a pen. Not a computer. But in the Internet of Things, we have things that are not considered computers as being connected to each other, what we call the machine-to-machine connectivity. Or they're connected to a bigger network. It may be a localized network, it may be the internet. So when you hear about connected refrigerators, I've seen some ads when when you live in a smart city, what they call the smart city, you have a refrigerator that tells you what you need, what is running out. Say you're running out of milk. Your refrigerator will send a text message to your phone saying you need to go to the grocery and get some milk because you're running out of milk. So very, very clever stuff, no? But when we talk about the things called and the IoT can be anything. In the future, it can be anything. Can be even your chair can be connected to the internet. Say you want your chair, you want heating on your chair. If you live in a cold country, and you suddenly sit on your chair and your chair detects that you're there, it's going to send heating in. So there are a lot of and this is what the world is going to. We are going towards a world wherein the ordinary things that we see every day are getting more sophisticated, they're getting more connected, and they have implications for privacy as well. So if you would like to know more about, actually, that's the only thing I'm going to talk about. So, so I was hoping to, to bring to kind of bring more light to the issue, because I think that's what we are looking at in the future. So from my description, who else do I need to give more examples of what the Internet of Things is? Can anybody raise their hand if it's not clear? Okay, don't be afraid. It took me a while to understand it as well. Okay, so I suppose yes. We have kind of a basic understanding of what it is. So what are the implications for privacy? A lot of these things are okay. First, let me go back to how we interact with the internet. So we're used to interacting with the internet using our phone. You have a screen, you log into the Wi-Fi, you visit some apps, or you have a laptop, and then you open your browser, you type in a web page, and then it shows up. With the Internet of Things, what is happening is so that is what we call active engagement with the internet. With the Internet of Things, what is happening is that these things are logging into or going into the internet and collecting data and sharing data with or without our consent. So if you have a connected mic, if you like karaoke, you're singing something, your karaoke mic might be collecting data about, I don't know, your voice level, how good you are at singing, what your score is in the karaoke, what songs you like, and then collecting it and then storing it, and then also sending it to a cloud service. And that cloud service may be in your house, it may be in your local community, it may not even be in your country. It may be in another country. So other privacy implications to that. But so we are going into what we call the passive engagement. No, I don't know if they call it Web 3.0, but it's not Web 2.0. So what is happening with the Internet of Things is that the connectivity is becoming more embedded. So it's becoming more embedded in the things that we see. No? It's not just our devices, but the ordinary things that we can have in our household. Sorry, I just need to, okay. So as I mentioned, the smart objects, the connected things are capable of collecting data, maybe not storing them as much, but they are capable of collecting it, of sending it somewhere, possibly a cloud system, to be aggregated. That data will be aggregated and possibly shared. So if, for instance, you have a glass, you have a connected glass, and you like drinking, I don't know, your favorite beverage. It can be you like having a beer in the morning. It's quite unusual, but if you do, then you do. So you like having a beer in the morning. That glass can tell you, or it will be able to tell what you're drinking, or what time you're drinking it, and will be able to, I mean, it might be benign for many of us, but if you have, say, if you have a health insurance provider, and that glass can connect to the insurance provider and say, well, he's drinking beer. I don't know if you should provide him insurance. Maybe you should increase his what do they call the premium that you pay. There is a case. I have a colleague in the U.S. and she is her father is being made to wear something that to make sure that he's taking the medicine. It's from the insurance company. So if he's not taking his medicine, it sends him like reminders, but also it tells the insurance company that, hey, this guy is not taking his medicine. I don't know if you should give him coverage, but the other thing is with traffic. So if you have a car, I think this is also happening in the U.S. now, but the example that I got was from Spain. So if you have a car, they attach something to the car that um, will send something to the insurance company on what your driving habits are. So if you have that attached to your car, that device attached to your car, then you pay a lower premium for your insurance. Then you get that device attached to your car, and then they get to monitor everything, your driving habits, I suppose, how you use the brakes, how you accelerate, and if you don't have that, then it will you will have to pay a higher insurance. So these things are being used, I suppose, and there are also some cases where there are devices that are being used for people to offer people discriminatory pricing in other areas. So there's a lot of potential for these devices and for these things to be used in our everyday lives. So when it comes to IoT, as I mentioned, these sensors are designed to collect more and more data. So it's not just with your device, you have some kind of control. You decide when you use your device, somewhat, and then you pretty much know when, you pretty much have an indication of when data is being collected about you because you're using it. You're using, you're going to a website, you're going on Facebook. So even if you don't know what kind of data is being collected about you, you have an inkling that maybe it's collecting data about me right now because I'm using it. But with the Internet of Things, if things are around you are connected to the internet, they may be collecting data about you on a continuous basis, even if you're not consciously using them. And a lot of this data will be related to people. It will be related to your habits. So it's becoming more and more, I suppose, ubiquitous, the data collecting. The other trend is that storing data is becoming a lot cheaper. It's becoming more and more cheap. This means that companies can store data for longer periods of time. Your data, if there are no regulations in place, your data can be available for longer and longer periods of time. Even if you think it's no longer relevant to you, it's still there. Okay, another point to think about for privacy in the Internet of Things is that, okay, everything that we do online is mediated, whether it's mediated by your ISP, it's mediated by your device, but it's always mediated by, it always passes through some third party. So, but because a lot of these devices, they look like ordinary objects. So your refrigerator can look like a normal refrigerator. We can be lulled into like a false sense of security, saying it just looks like a normal refrigerator. You know, what harm could it do? It can't do anything to me. And so we also have to watch out for that. At the moment, when we go online, when we visit a website, when we first sign up to an app, there are terms and conditions. We sign up to terms and conditions. So maybe most of us do not read it, but at least they're there. So if you want to refer to them, you can pull them up on your screen, and you can see them. You can see pretty much what you're signing up for. But with the Internet of Things, a lot of these things do not have screens. They do not have an interface. So you have a connected pen, you have a mic, there's no screen there. So how can you interact with it? How can you demand information about, what is this thing collecting about me? It may be completely invisible to you. Okay, the last thing I suppose that I would like to discuss is algorithms. So we're used to, who here has heard or, who here needs me to explain algorithms? I don't know if I can have a good explanation for it, but it's the coding, and one of our panelists can correct me. But it's the code that goes into, for example, Facebook. You know what goes into your news feed? How Facebook knows what you're interested in? part of that is based on they use algorithms for it. It's a kind of programming code. Alvin, but it's that companies use, especially internet companies, to help them achieve, what is it? To help them.
The internet companies like Facebook and Google are holding a bunch of information about you. They know where you've been, they know what you click on, they know what you seem to be interested in. If it's Gmail or you utilize Facebook Messenger, they know keywords that you use, so they know to some extent what you're interested in terms of ideas. And depending upon what they click on, what you click on, they may know something about your religion, your religious beliefs, your intensity of those beliefs, where you are on the political spectrum, things like that. In the U.S., this is big deal because this is how political advertising got done. What they do is they put you and your usage into a bucket because you are, to the extent you are unique, but you're probably unique with a whole bunch of other people who have the same criteria that they're collecting. And so they can make some assumptions based upon the behaviors of people who look like the information they've got on you. And that creates the algorithm, the mathematical model that determines what you're hit with and what they think about you and your behaviors for predictive purposes. They're kind of saying, well, if somebody has X, Y, and Z in their profile, as we interpret them, then they are sports and beer and rugby. Okay, yeah, they're into sports, but they're really into rugby, and they like beer. So we're going to send them what kind of things do we know about people who have those characteristics? Well, here's what we think about their political beliefs based upon that. Here's what we think about their religious beliefs. Here's what we think about their buying habits. And this is what you're going to see in your feed.
Thank you very much, Mark. You saved me there. Okay, so so I suppose I should put it more simply. We're used to machines doing what we want them to do. Even when when we code for something, even when we're using algorithms, we are used to machines are supposed to do what they're programmed to do, right? But we're now coming into an era where machines can learn. So there are learning algorithms. They can adapt. So a good example is a self-driving car. There are algorithms that are designed to learn how you drive so that it can better adapt to the driving conditions on the road, but also when it needs to intervene. So there are things that means that there are possibilities wherein machines, and this is already happening in self-driving cars, machines can make decisions on your behalf based on your past behavior and based on the set of programs that it has, and based on what it has learned about you. And maybe this is not exactly how you would act, but that's what the machine thinks. That's how the machine thinks you would act, and that's what the machine will do for you. So just some of the things, I suppose, I don't have enough much time, but some of the things that we need to think about. When it comes to just key considerations, I think the wonderful panelists here have already highlighted a lot of the issues. So some of the things that we need to think about, and other countries are also have considered and have enacted and have implemented, but some of things that I don't know if we can call them good practices, but when it comes to how much control we have over data and what we can do, there are countries and there are communities that are pushing for companies need to limit the data that they collect to what is relevant, and only when it's appropriate.
Thank you very much, Noel. YouTube also has a lot of good stuffs. So the other good documentary is See You in Tokyo 2020. You can download that and watch it. Thank you very much, Noel. Before we allow the audience to ask questions, so I will just stimulate the conversation or the questions. So I have to ask each question to the panelist. And after that, I'll allow the audience to ask the questions. But if I ask the questions, I just want briefly, not in detail, because we have a lot of, I'm assuming this audience has a lot of questions to ask. Okay? Okay. Thank you. Okay, now the mic is yours. So before I would allow the audience to ask questions to the panelists, just to make sure we record you guys, or even you appear on the video, you have to stand somewhere, just to make sure they captured you to ask the question. Okay, thank you. So you have to introduce yourself and ask the question.
Okay, so, I stand up, yes. Margaret Joyce from TRR. Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank the panelists and commend you for good presentation to each and every one. And it's very interesting to learn about, using the internet and online privacy for the users. I'm particularly interested in Mark's presentation on how our privacy is at risk by using mobile data apps and with our service providers. And it's very interesting for me to firstly learn about, encrypted and non-encrypted or open space, and then, very interesting to know about, how we use Facebook, and Facebook or other apps you use every day treat us like their products, because they use our information for, every time we log in for providing for other apps advertisement. I mean, it's the service, how they make money through us. And then it becomes scary when we learn about, that when you swipe your ATM card, Visa card at Bomashare, you don't know the whether or not you're safe with the open access and all that. And I definitely agree with you that we should have law or some sort of legislative framework or some regulatory instruments in place so that we are protected somehow. And because I agree with you in your introduction speech that we have census, and I believe we are now using it, I don't know, in Vanuatu, where, for disaster management and all that, and information they get in from the locals in the community, and we don't know, we cannot guarantee, because in Vanuatu, it's a fact right now that we don't have anything in place for protection of online privacy, and as well as in Fiji, I guess, I stand to be corrected. So I guess my question will be about the work of BIRC. If you've done some research or some into the best practice framework or a guideline. I mean, we know Australia has this, but I mean, we would be happy to get from you if there's any practice or a regulatory framework in place that you could suggest or recommend for other Pacific Island countries to use as a start-off or benchmark, or for ISOC, any international instrument for internet privacy that we could, in Vanuatu, in small island states, could use. Maybe we can have some of that. Sorry, it's a question that does not come out from your presentation, but we're here to discuss some way for if there's some best practices. So thank you.
Thank you for the question. PIRC is, first of all, is working on it. Delsey's kind of handed that to us at the recent session, so she's all over that issue, and that we are a resource that can perform that work. The toughest role I think I've got as the research director is to try to find a legislative framework and a regulatory framework that suits the island economy. It's one thing for Australia to tell its big grocers and its large banks and its large internet providers who have data centers there, and so they can be regulated there and inspected there on how to operate. It's something else for Vanuatu or Tokelau or Tonga, to island nations with smaller economies, to take on a very expensive and very technical monitoring role. I mean, it's tough enough probably to go around and do spectrum monitoring to make sure that one wireless provider isn't stomping on the frequencies of the other, and that's pretty inexpensive to do and not as manpower intensive to do as some of the stuff we're talking about and some of the stuff Australia is talking about. So yeah, we're looking for a framework that suits both the needs of the citizens of all of the Pacific Island states, as well as something that is affordable and understandable by the people that are being regulated and the people that are, in fact, the regulators. And that's really the challenge, is to find something that works in that intersection. But yeah, we're working on it.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Your answer leads to another question. Well, it's all about this online privacy in the region. My question leads to in the region. Do you have any case studies? Like, we're talking about what is happening in America, but do we have any case studies here in the region? And how do you deal with it? And do we have any success stories of how successful we had dealt with these online issues? Thank you.
We've got some legislation that was recently funded by World Bank and ITU that is probably versions from 2015, 2016 that's been enacted, not in Vanuatu, but I believe 2015 in Tonga, and I think more recently up in the Marshalls, that we're looking at. Whether that's applicable to across the Pacific, and whether that in itself was as good as it could have been, I think is still up for question. It's not question. It's up for review. In other words, you've got to sit down and look at, okay, so what's happened in 2 years? And the short answer is that a lot happens in 2 years. So you take a look at legislation that was passed as recently as 2015, that was probably done by the consultant in 2014. And now you're looking at a different world when you're looking at DNS and security being an issue, and the openness of Wi-Fi being an issue, and people being concerned. So that's a long way of saying I can't give you any success stories yet. Now, what do we do here? What do we have going for us? Nothing terrible seems to have happened in the Pacific. So urgency, while it's there, it's not like we're about to fall off the cliff. Certainly there is a notion that CERTs, computer emergency response teams, are being brought up in each country. There's one coming up in Fiji. There's one up in Tonga. I don't know what this, you've got one being worked on or existing in Vanuatu. Okay, those wind up being critically important, especially in a world where your access to the internet is somewhat limited by either a satellite, a single satellite link or a single cable, because you don't want to lose that connectivity to the world that your economy and your government might be relying on. So the right things are being done. I don't know. I know Fiji is now spending more on its computer forensic group inside its law enforcement. I don't know about the rest of the Pacific. So that will wind up being important as well. Not just the computer teams, but also putting law enforcement and getting them on the ball in terms of the latest developments. And then there needs to be education at the quite frankly at the grassroots level. Keeping kids safe is going to be a role for the society, not a role for the law enforcement. You just can't. You can't ask police to watch how kids are using the internet. That's something that's got to be taught at home. And that winds up being an education process that gets taken on by quite frankly civil society. The education can be put out there, but You cannot, like I said, the solution starts with y'all. For kids' safety online, it's going to start with the family and the society. That's not something that's going to be able to be legislated. So yeah, that's kind of what we've done so far.
Thank you. So, which is why we have the research coordinator to go around in the Pacific and collect information. So in fact, the purpose of this conference is to get us information, what's happening, and so that we can move forward creating an appropriate mechanism to assist us. So for Vanuatu's case, yes, we are aware, for example, for Obamashe. I'm fully aware that, yes, yeah, we're swapping cards, and I'm fully aware of the negative impact of it. But I cannot tell the whole citizens that this is wrong. Why? Because we need to work with the parties involved, the stakeholders involved, example, the banks, okay, Obamashe, whoever is part of, and which is why we have these conferences to talk about and discuss together, come up with an appropriate framework to assist us. That's where Mark comes in, and that's where Alvin comes in terms of policy making, and that's where ISO comes in. So to be working together, find ways to address such, okay? So yes, we don't even know as of today whether it's encrypted. Okay, when you're swapping your card at the Obamashe. Is it safe? But we cannot tell the whole world. Unless we get everybody together, and work together, we get there.
Thank you. Kasagalgal, Papua New Guinea, Pikaisok. I'll be very quick with this one. I've got two questions. Sorry, Mark, we're picking on you, but so based on what we've said so far today, in terms of cyber policy and strategy, there's various frameworks going around and various consultations. I'm aware of the ITU and European Union in the Pacific Islands working on that. So I just wanted to get your views on whether harmonization or diversity in terms of cyber policy and strategies and what the way forward is. And maybe someone else can take this. The second question is just on what I picked out as a common denominator, and what everyone said is, our own responsibility. So does that make a strong case for digital literacy as part of our strategy towards privacy in the Pacific Islands? Thank you.
How much time have we got? I mean, that's a whole session in itself. I think it's an interesting international debate right now, and I don't think it's being heard at the ITU, and I think it ought to be. And I think the debate is whether the internet ought to mean the same, a net neutral internet ought to mean the same thing, and the internet experience should mean the same thing worldwide or not. If internet engagement, so from both sides, from both tails, is to mean the same thing worldwide and the same thing to all citizens of the world, then the experience should be the same. And the conversation I'm having with the policymakers, with the people who are inputting to the policymakers in the US, is whether just because the US, for example, is a developed economy, should it have different rules than India, and should it have different rules than the Pacific? Because the rules they're thinking about there put incredibly high costs on government and incredibly high costs on the commercial side, while at the same time, granted, protecting citizens' rights. But citizens' rights in the US are entirely different than citizens' rights in the Pacific and citizens' rights in India, where the biometric IDs that are currently being established in India would never play out in the United States, because it would be considered an invasion of privacy by the government. So I think there needs to be an overall debate on, because it's going to wind up at the UN, and the access to the internet is going to wind up being accepted as a basic human right. The question is, what does that mean? And so yeah, I'm all for harmonization. I'm just waiting to figure out where is the body going to be that is going to say, here is the baseline, and everything after that is kind of optional country by country. And I'll let the other panelists talk about the other question.
Sorry to pick that, but I think it's an important matter that you've brought forward, especially the harmonizations of what's available in terms of our policy framework and the legislation. So this is critical for us. You know, it touches at that international level. Let's come back to the Pacific context. First of all, let's ask each nation, have we done that harmonization at the national level before moving up to the regional level? So, and which is why, for example, you know, in our case, this is my colleague's project. Joyce, raise your hand. So what she's doing is trying to go around and, you know, with related legislations and making sure that there's no duplications and so forth. That should be carried out at the national level first before moving out. Similarly to the policies. Okay, so this is very important. It's important for us to make sure that first our legislation, you know, are talking, you know, together and not limiting one another. Similarly with the policies, then we can move up to the regional level and, you know, look around the region whether it's appropriate to have at the regional level some mechanisms that could cater for such issues.
I'll just add on to that. I think the harmonization bit, there's simply not a single global solution for here in the Pacific. So that simply being said, I think we have our own issues and challenges alike for each of the Pacific countries. So I think it sort of has to be a bottom-up approach if we have to come up with solutions. So Vanuatu, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, each we have our own category of issues that we need to focus on. One good example is the India model, which is really focused on having a national approach to bigger problems. And I think we in the Pacific, we have to really start up with the really basics, and I think the thing like Dulcie mentioned about the credit card issues. I think this should also be driven up from the bank's perspective when the whole world had gone off really further. I think the credit card services, it's slowly coming up in the Pacific, and even now we notice even for Fiji's case, we don't have much usage of credit card and other e-services, e-banking services within Fiji's context. So banks would also need to play a big role in the privacy bit. Awareness for credit card usage and how secure or insecure most of these mechanisms would be. And then, yeah, like I said, we will need to really start off from the basics, education and awareness from the primary school levels. I think that would be a good model to start off with.
I think on your digital literacy issue, I don't want to lose that thought. Digital literacy is critical. People need to know not just how to use the internet, but how it works. Certainly, we've lost a lot in terms of automotive. And I draw that parallel. There was a time when the engine inside your car was no more difficult to fix than needing a screwdriver and a set of wrenches. And everything pretty much was within your control to adjust and fix, and if you understood how the engine worked and it wasn't complex science, you could have at your access the tools necessary to fix the problem and to tweak it and to individualize your engine's performance. We've since lost that a lot with the electronic engine, starting with electronic ignition and going all the way and electronic fuel injection. So you cannot anymore really fix your own car. You need the specialized software that does the diagnostics, and you need the circuit boards, most particularly, that are actually running the electronics inside the car. That, in my old world view, as a non-digital native, is scary. I want to know how what I'm using works. so I can fix it and so I can understand what's going wrong right before it needs to get fixed and how it's interacting with me. I think if you don't know how the internet works, I mean, I understand, you know, it's one thing to teach people how to log on and how to use Excel and how to use Windows and all that other stuff. But if you don't know how the internet works and understand how the information is flowing, you don't know what risk you're putting yourself at. Or whether you're putting, or flip side, whether there's no risk and you're just scared about nothing. But you need to know what's going on in order to know how to feel about it. And so I think digital literacy down to that level is critically important.
Thank you for that question as well. So very briefly, I think we're also running over time. Thank you for bringing that up. And on this note, I would actually like to commend the initiative of the TRR. In that, it's because we are now, we've connected more than 3 billion people. So a lot of these people have connected once the internet is available to them. So once they have connectivity, they go online. But we're also now talking about connecting people who are not yet online, or the so-called 1 billion or the next billion, the next 2 billion. And a lot of these people have have additional barriers, whether it's income barriers or barriers to literacy that needs to be addressed. So coming to what TRR is doing, when it comes to digital literacy as well, we need to, yes, incorporate privacy, that's very important, but also we need to think about the modes by which we deliver digital literacy. So we're now going into communities that may not have had formal schooling. So, and there have been recent studies conducted where they say that when you're talking about digital literacy, especially for people who are out of school, they are more receptive to receiving ideas from friends and family rather than, say, in a formal setting like this even, or a classroom setting. So I think what TRR is doing is very, very good. They're going into the communities and they're training community members to spread the knowledge. So I think that's an important avenue by which we can, going forward, we can spread the values of privacy that, or the privacy considerations that we would like for the online environment, is to go into more informal modes of letting people understand what the privacy implications are of internet use when they start to use the internet. I think, yes, and that's all I have to.
Thank you. Since we run short of time, so I just only allow 5 more questions before we wrap up. Okay, so we start from VG. So you need to come and stand here, introduce yourself, and raise your questions or comment. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is John Chand from Fiji. I would like to mention a few things which you guys have already highlighted, especially there is no legislations of data privacy in the Pacific region. So all the Pacific countries need to work on that, and where users can complain and raise up their issues. Like we have said in few countries, but those are mostly security side. And the other thing is posting of information, accessing information, users need to be careful. For example, social media accounts have security settings which users are not aware. So there you can block certain things like who can view what you are posting, and whether you are posting on public or on your friends can only view. And the other thing is a lot of users have been hacked, like in Facebook, their accounts have been created and people have duplicated their photos and everything. So, and they are messaging their friends. So those are the risk of using social media accounts, and ensuring the messenger apps that you are using, like Viber and Facebook Messenger, iMessage, and WhatsApp, ensure that it's encrypted. So, and also your location, when you use apps, you need to be careful that your location is always off. That protects you from your privacy. And the critical part of users is always to update the OS, the operating system, the apps, so that secures you from security updates, like the ransomware attack that Mark has already mentioned. And coming back to IoT devices that connected to the internet, which does not have any security settings, like most of the IoT devices now sold on the global market, it has only limited settings that you can change. Like you can't change the IP address, the private IP address, the default username, password. So users need to be careful, especially buying CCTV cameras, which exposes your home videos or your business videos that goes online. People can attack. For example, the Dynatek recently, last year that happened. Yeah, so that's all. Thank you.
Yes, my question is relating to the IoT. We have heard that the products such as a fridge or a microphone doesn't have a screen, doesn't have a face where you can pull out the terms and conditions. But wouldn't you have the terms and conditions in the book from the product you buy from a shop that you could always refer to when you have an IoT product?
At the moment, we don't have a standard manual for, I mean, there are organizations and there are industry bodies that are starting to formulate standards for the Internet of Things. But yes, it is something that at the moment we have when we get something, when we purchase something that is, you know, an IoT device, usually we have, I think, a manual for how you can use it, not so much on, well, on the privacy implications of, you know, how you're using the device. But there are standards that are being developed, but it's more about how do you design a product from the design phase itself. How do you design a product for it to be compliant to those standards from the very beginning? So users will have to worry less about, you know, what kind of information or how exposed they are to these risks when they use these products, because there are standards that are coming into place, but obviously these are only industry standards. And the problem with industry standards is that small companies can also produce IoT devices, and they may not have the resources to comply with whatever standards is being set, especially if it's not, if these standards are not, I suppose, obligatory. But those are starting, just to say that those are starting to happen, wherein you have devices that have some kind of, or a minimum set of privacy standards in place before they are even rolled out for use.
Yeah, just adding on to that, I think the manufacturers have actually lagged on the security aspects of IoT devices. So there's a concept of computing, manufacturing versus security. I think in one of the ICANN meetings in Denmark in March, we discussed quite a bit of IoT issues which are upcoming for Europe and across the world. A lot of examples of IoT hacking were given, and one big issue was that some of the manufacturers had actually jumped in line to come up with IoT devices without considering IoT security built into the hardware and the firmware and in the software. It is predicted that we will have somewhere about 50.1 billion of IoT connected devices by 2020. With having said that, we also have the 5G services up in the race by 2020 as well. So I think come in the next 3 or 4 years, we will have new products, IoT services coming. I think some of the countries are already started retailing a few of these devices, South Korea, in the US, and then a few in the Europe. And I think recently we've had the Europe coming up with a few legislative solutions to curb the coming IoT security issues. Yeah, and I think one basic IoT theorem is that anything could be connected to the internet, and then in the security corollary, which says that everything connected to the internet can be hacked. So that is something we want to focus in the next 3 or 4 years when we'll have IoT hitting the markets really big.
Hi, I'm Alexis. I'm working on e-health initiatives in Vanuatu. And I have a question for the panel because in some countries for healthcare, when you create patient education materials or you're trying to get consent from a patient for things, for example, written materials have to be written at a 4th grade reading level. Or when you're trying to obtain consent from a patient, it involves describing it in a manner that they can understand, and if they don't speak English, they have to have a translator who's approved who can make that translation into the language that the person speaks. So I'm wondering for the internet, the language, I think the majority is just English, but do you see any move towards changing consent processes when people are getting data or personal data from people to a reading level that might be lowered, and perhaps more languages or tailoring that language to the person who's interacting with the internet?
For us, okay, thank you, Alexis. For us in Vanuatu, that is the major challenge. First, to have our own content in our own dialects or language. Okay, if, for example, in Tana, or in the Banks group, or even in Luganfield, that they want to access information, the information through Bislama, the information to respective dialects. We don't have that. Why? Because we also need the experts on creating a local content. And who are the experts that we are looking for? The experts within our nation, within Vanuatu, the local experts who understands our culture, one, and who understand what we want to achieve and what type of information is required at a specific community. For example, this one is for healthcare, and that for Vanuatu we don't have, and it's a major challenge. And I'm pretty sure it's across the Pacific region, and it's something that through these kind of workshops and conference, identifying some of those that are interested to take lead and be part of, and there we can create some contenders within our nation. So that's all I can contribute on. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We'll just have to bear with what is there, which is the English. And we are lucky that they have Chinese out there and the Middle East language and the Spanish, but not in Vanuatu, not in Fijian, not whatever. But I may be wrong. Let me just pass on to my colleague here from Fiji.
I think most of our official languages and official documents for the government, especially, we have English. So I don't see any other languages being, and then mostly for our data input and collection, which is more in English. So I'm not sure that is something which we have considered for Fiji's case. Yeah, but I'm not sure if the PIRC is working on something to look at the Pacific region in terms of multi-language and those kind of issues.
One of the problems is, what do you legislate versus what do you let the internet community build up? In a place like Fiji, you wind up with an official language, and you wind up with multiple official languages, but you're still down to Fijian, English, and Hindi. Programming in Hindi, coding in Hindi, all the way up to websites in Hindi, is beginning to get up to speed. There's a recognition of the large market in India, and so there's now an upsurge of Hindi sites. Programming in Fiji Fijian is going to be something that's going to be left really to the locals to develop a market, and then to develop a capability. And I don't know whether USP or FNU or University of Fiji any of them have programs running towards that. The only Fiji site I'm aware of is the Fiji version of the newspaper. So it is possible to, I mean, there is some Fijian content available, but not, it's certainly not interactive as far as I know. And I don't know what ISOC's position is on local languages, because that fractures the internet, and you wind up with some
No,
subgroups.
but a big part of having an inclusive internet as well is to be able to make sure that the internet is accessible for everyone, and that means having it translatable, not even translatable, having a lot of content online that is relevant for everyone, because that's how people will use the internet. But just to Mark's point, so there are companies that are starting to address the language issue, but sadly, the likes of Google, they go to where the market is. So they go to India because India is very, very big. So they're doing a lot of things there when it comes to local content. But unfortunately for us, that's why initiatives like the ICT, Women in ICT for Girls, is very, very important here, because we need to take charge of creating local content. I mean, George is twiddling his thumbs. He wants me to finish. But yes, it's something that I think is very, very good that is starting to happen in Vanuatu. We're starting to teach young people to develop, to have the capacity to develop, the relevant content that is useful for us. George, please.
My name is Aldona from Port Vila. I just have a simple question about Facebook. We understand that Facebook is a totally different company, and we access it through Digicel and TVL. So, do Digicel and TVL have something like daily statistic or weekly statistic, shows that how many people what they do, like sending information, text message or video view for something, and what video they are watching. So do Digicel and TVL, they have daily statistic from Facebook company? Thank you.
So to respond to your question, first of all, thank you. It's a valid question. Secondly, if you see the online service going out for you to participate on, that is a very good start exercise to collect that information, okay? That will assist, not just for you, but the operators as well. So at the moment, before I can tell you any more further information, let me ask my, economics who's sitting there. Cameron, please, can you respond, to his question, whether we have any data collected from TVL or Digicel in terms of Facebook?
Just to confirm, I think you mean that do Digicel and TVL have knowledge of what you're doing on Facebook? Now, is that correct? Or how you're using Facebook?
I think it's the statistics collected.
Relating to Facebook or separately?
Relating to usage of Facebook through the two main networks.
That's the thing, that's actually unclear. And this is one of the reasons why we need to consider online privacy and what rules we have in place for it. So one of the things that they may have is something called deep packet inspection, which is actually looking at the packets of information that get sent between your device and the internet, your internet provider, to see what you're actually looking at. Without something like that, they have no real idea of what you're doing online. But with something like that, they can have a bit more of an idea of what websites you're using, whether it's video content, text, whatever it is. So that's the type of thing that we as a regulator, we as a government are not 100% sure of. What we have is rules in place for what TVL and Digicel do with your personal information. So if you sign up for a product or a service with them, if you give them personal information about your address, your banking details, whatever it is, there's restrictions on what they can do with that. But in terms of when you actually use the service, what information they collect or what information the website collects, that's where there's a sort of lack. There's a bit of a black hole of what are they allowed to use, what do they use, and how it works. Usually what sort of restricts it is the cost, because it's very expensive to get machines, computers to analyze everything you do online. But those costs are dropping all the time. And so they're using it more and more to find out what you do online and target what you do. So there's not really a clear answer on that one, I'm afraid.
Yes, thank you, Cameron. I think it comes back to the DPI, deep packet inspection issue. Just to let you know that I think DPI is in most countries it is illegal from the perspective of internet governance, and most ISPs have been not allowed to implement DPI within the ISP network. So that is one issue I think the ISPs need to consider without inspecting or not even the deep, just to at least the SPI level as well. So from the Facebook perspective, they have access to whatever content you are posting online. So they have the right to put it down or whatever. Like in my earlier statement, some of the countries are coming up with legislations and laws to inform and directly work with Facebook to bring certain content which seems to be, which is, let's say for example, defined within their context as something which is not suitable to be posted online, videos, hate speeches and so forth. So I think the ISPs or the, let's say for example in Vanuatu's case, the TVL and Digicel might not have those powers, or maybe the regulator has the powers to enforce those the blocking or bringing or removing content. Oh, I'm not really sure if Dulcie, you could clarify that.
No, that's one of the gray area. Okay, so let me just ask Mark to contribute a bit on his question.
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt. Before Mark contributes, we reached 12:30. So in case you guys want to have a late lunch, because it's 12:30. So from 12 to 1 is lunch hour. So just to make it fair to everyone, I will run off our discussion. If you have time during the lunch hour or even the next session, we have policy framework and how to protect the framework, then you guys just can ask the answer or even the comment of your questions. But for the meantime, I have to close up our session.
Thank you, Charles. I think we have a related topic this afternoon, so come, we shall continue. Yeah, bring your questions over. I also would like to make known our friend Kit Davidson. He is the internet governance guru for the Pacific, so please have him welcome.